In this video, we'll be going over the history of one of the most powerful Warlock pets, the Felguard. The Felguard was first seen in Warcraft 3 as a creep on the Outland tileset. Creep meaning they spawned as either neutral or hostile NPCs on the map that guarded map objectives during the campaign, or defended gold mines and small outposts during custom matches, or also being a good way to get items and XP for your heroes. These demons were large, heavily armored units with big, odd-looking weapons. The different Felguards ranged in what abilities they had, from the weaker ones just auto-attacking, to the strongest having a cleaving attack, vampiric aura passive, as well as a Howl of Terror ability. The Felguard wasn't added to the game as a Warlock pet until the Burning Crusade, and was given to the Demonology Warlocks as a talent rather than a baseline unlockable demon like all the others, making it the first spec-specific demon added to the game, as it was the final talent you could take in the demo tree. When it was first added to the game, however, there was a bug where it could be summoned and left out, so if you then did a respec, you could keep the demon even though you no longer had the talent for it, which was quite the powerful boost. However, in one of the first patches in the Burning Crusade, they made it so the game would double check if you had that talent every so often, and if you didn't, the pet would just die. Now, as to the abilities the demon had, first, it had an intercept on a 30-second cooldown, which worked just like the warrior ability of the same name, and would charge a target, do an instant melee attack, as well as stunning them for 3 seconds. Its basic damage ability was Cleave. On a 6-second cooldown, it dealt damage to the target and a nearby enemy, allowing it to tank 2 targets pretty easily. And its next ability was called Anguish. This was a taunt on a 5-second cooldown and generated the exact same amount of threat as the Voidwalker's Torment taunt ability. The Voidwalker did have a talent which increased the threat of its ability, but the Felguard's much higher damage made up for this, allowing it to tank pretty easily, even better than the Voidwalker in a lot of ways. The pet was also given Avoidance, a passive that reduced the damage it took from area of effect attacks, making it a bit more resilient since pets aren't programmed to get out of void zones if the boss is positioned with one directly behind them. So it was pretty common for pets to die before all of the pets were given the Avoidance passive. And its last ability was another passive called Demonic Frenzy, making its melee attacks give a stacking 5% attack power buff, stacking up to 10 times with a short duration, which basically just increased its damage against bosses or other long-lived targets that it could attack constantly. The Felguard had 2 major talents that interacted with it, the first of them being Master Demonologist, a talent that gave a buff to the demon and the player, which had a different effect for each specific demon. The Felguard's being a shared 5% damage buff and a plus 0.5 resistance in every stat. And the other major talent being Demonic Sacrifice, that at the cost of having to sacrifice your demon, gave you a buff depending on the sacrificed demon. The Felguard's was quite special, as it was a mixture of 2 other demon buffs. The Felguard gave 10% increased shadow damage, and plus 2% of your total mana every 4 seconds, which was actually just a weaker version of the Felhunter's 3% and the Succubus's 15% shadow damage effects. Although powerful, getting to the Felguard cost a lot of points, and just to sacrifice it for some damage, it was not quite worth taking that talent with the Felguard, so many just stuck with using Demonic Sacrifice with the Succubus buff, if they wanted to go with the sacrifice style. This did not mean the Felguard and the talents around it were bad. The Felguard being at the very bottom meant if anyone went deep enough to get it, they were making a Felguard build, and therefore would take all of the buffs for it, and not really ones to sacrifice it. This buffed Felguard made it good for world content, and for low-skilled players who could spend more time focusing on the mechanics while their demon did most of their damage. And the Felguard's specific talents were basically just a whole bunch of things that increased its stats. Soul Link, which redirected 20% of the damage you took to your demon pet, as well as a talent called Fel Domination, which on a 15-minute cooldown could allow you to summon your demon in half a second instead of having a 10-second cast time, just in case your pet died during the fight and you wanted to bring it back quickly. Then in Wrath of the Lich King, Warlock's got one of its first of many Demonology reworks, although this one was not as big of a deal as the others that would come later. Unlike the other 2 Warlock specs, the Demonology talents got mixed around the tree, along with the standard talents being added and removed with any new expansion. One of these new talents for Demonologists was called Fel Synergy, where at rank 2, it allowed 15% of your spell damage dealt to heal your pet, making your Felguard even tankier. Although as this was at the very top of the tree, it was easy for every spec to grab. But without Soul Link, most demons didn't take very much damage anyway, or if they did, they were being bursted down, where this tiny bit of healing wouldn't save their lives. With the new levels added and the addition of the very appealing Metamorphosis talent, this made going deep into the demonology tree far more common. The addition of many new demon buffing talents and the loss of demonic sacrifice helped too. Wrath was also when the Felguard finally got its own improved Felguard talent. However, it was mixed into the improved Voidwalker talent, and the talent was given a new name called Demonic Brutality. And all the talent did was increase the damage of its stacking buff it got from attacking bosses. Warlocks also got a new talent called Demonic Empowerment. On a 1-minute cooldown, it allowed you to empower your demon, a different effect for each demon, and the Felguard's being that it broke all stun, snares, and movement impairing effects on it, also becoming immune to them while also gaining 20% attack speed for 15 seconds. It was kind of like a weaker version of Bestial Wrath, a Beastmaster Hunter talent, which increased the damage of their pet by 50% and made them immune to all CC for 18 seconds. And finally, since Wrath of the Lich King introduced the glyph system, Warlocks received a glyph of the Felguard, which increased its attack power by 20%. Then with Cataclysm, we got the only real rework for the Felguard itself, paired with yet another rework for the spec. However, to be fair, all classes got reworked too, as Cataclysm basically reworked everything in the game, even the world. The Felguard was learned at level 10 when you chose the Demonology tree instead of as a talent. There was now almost no reason to touch other demons as Demonology Warlocks. And just like all the other demons, it no longer had a Soul Shard cost, as Blizzard was removing spell reagent costs, including Soul Shards this expansion. Nearly all of the Felguard's abilities got a rework, with nearly all of the old abilities removed completely and replaced with new things. The first of its new abilities was called Failstorm, a cooldown ability that caused it to enter a Blade Storm, doing constant AoE damage to anything around it, acting much like the Warrior's ability Blade Storm, but fell. Intercept's effect got split into two new spells. First was Axe Toss, a spell that the Warlock needed to command it to do, which was a ranged 4-second stun on a 30-second cooldown, which allowed you to stun targets without forcing your Felguard to actually move to that target. This could even be used while you were unable to cast spells yourself, allowing Warlocks to stun annoying rogues who might be trying to burst them down. The second ability was Pursuit. Much closer to Intercept, it had a 15-second cooldown and charged the pet to the target, attacking instantly and increased the Felguard's speed by 30% for 6 seconds. A good way for the demon to keep up on a fleeing target. Cleave was replaced with Legion Strike. On a 6-second cooldown, the spell hit a target and all enemies within 6 yards of that target, dealing split damage to all of them. It also applied a wound to the main target, reducing their healing by 10% for 5 seconds. However, with no replacement for Anguish, there was now no taunt on the demon, meaning it was no longer a reliable tank, and the only way for it to keep aggro was just with its high DPS. Now with the Cataclysm's new smaller trees, a lot of the demonology talents that previously affected the Felguard saw changes or got removed. The Fel Domination talent, which previously allowed you to summon your demon in half a second on a 15-minute cooldown, was changed into a new talent called Demonic Rebirth, which gave you a buff if your demon died that allowed you to cast a demon with a 100% reduced cast time on a 2-minute cooldown. And also the Warlock's Demonic Empowerment talent, the one which was similar to Bestial Wrath, and it got a nerf so that it no longer increased the pet's damage. But they did add more CCs that the ability could remove, making them now also immune to Banish, Fear, and Horror effects, which seems like it was focusing on countering other Warlocks trying to CC your pet. The Glyph of Felguard with this new Cataclysm glyph system got moved from a major glyph to a prime glyph, now increasing its Legion Strike damage by 5%. And one last thing before we move on to Mist of Pandaria, Masteries were introduced in Cataclysm, a new stat found on gear that did different things for every single spec, and Demonologies was a buff to your demons, including the Felguard, along with the Caster and Metamorphosis DPS the increase also gave. As we entered Mist of Pandaria, we saw another rework to Demonology, and some pretty big changes to the Felguard, in the way demons work and even a talent tree overhaul. First, the Felguard was now learned at level 42, instead of as soon as you got access to the demonology tree. The rework of the demonology system is when they changed the demon's mana into energy, allowing them to last longer in combat, as their energy just kept recharging, instead of stopping halfway through combat. Also, with demons like the Felguard, it didn't really make sense that they had to use mana to use their attacks anyway. With Mist of Pandaria, we saw the introduction of the Grimoire talents, a trio of demonic books talents all share in a row that did quite different things, usually to do with your demon. The first being Grimoire of Supremacy. This talent increased all of your demon's damage by 20% and gave them a new appearance. The Felguards being a Wrathguard, a tailed, blade-covered, dual-wielding beast. These versions of the demons usually had slightly stronger versions of the normal demon abilities. The Wrathguard's abilities were all the exact same as the Felguard's though, simply dealing more damage. But there was one big difference between the two pets. The Wrathguard dual-wielded weapons, whereas the Felguard used a big two-handed slow weapon. And so like normal dual-wielding, the Wrathguard hit for less damage with each attack, but hit more often with its two weapons. So that overall, it did more damage than the Felguard with its big, slow attacks. As it should, as it was a talent specifically designed to be a more powerful version of that demon. But all of this ended up causing problems for the Felguard later on in WoW's history, which we'll get to in a bit once we get to that point in the Felguard's history. The next Grimoire was the Grimoire of Service. On a 2-minute cooldown, you could use the knowledge from this Grimoire to summon a second demon of your choice. They would attack the target for 20 seconds, also using their signature spell when first summoned, the Felguards being its stun. The final demonic Grimoire was Grimoire of Sacrifice. The Sacrifice spell was back after being removed in Wrath of the Lich King, and now part of all 3 specs. It now did nearly the exact same thing for every single demon, increasing your single target spell damage, and giving you a small health regen. But what did make the spell unique for each demon it was used on was that it also allowed you to gain that demon's special signature ability, with the Felguards being able to use its Axe Toss ability. Also in Mists, all of the demon-specific glyphs got combined into one glyph called the Glyph of Demon Training, which just gave the Felguard a 20% health buff. Second, Warlocks got their first Felguard cosmetic glyph, being the Glyph of Felguard. It allowed the Felguard to equip a two-handed weapon from the Warlock's bag, meaning the Warlock finally had some unique customization on their demon. Although nothing still on the level of Hunter pets, which means you could see a Felguard walking around with the corrupted Ashbringer. Now we move on to Warlords of Draenor, yet again another demonology rework, and with a small change to the talents where each spec could now have their own spec-specific talents. For example, Grimoire of Sacrifice was now removed entirely from demonology, and Grimoire of Synergy was added in its place. This Grimoire gave both you and your demon a proc. That proc was a random chance when dealing damage to give the other a 15% damage buff for 15 seconds. With Warlords of Draenor, we also saw one new talent row, and one of these new talents was Demonic Servitude, which allowed the Warlock to have the Doomguard and the Infernal as permanent pets. This finally brought competition to the Felguard, as the Infernal was a good AoE DPS pet and a good tanking pet, while the Doomguard was a good single target DPS pet and a good utility pet for stuff like PvP with slows and silences. The question was if the loss of DPS cooldowns and a talent point was worth not picking another talent and just sticking with the Felguard. The Felguard also saw a new ability called Threatening Presence. This was a pretty nice taunt for the demon, as really it did not have one since Cataclysm removed Anguish, as in the meantime it had just relied on its high damage and passive to build threat, returning it back to a good tanking pet alternative. Lastly, before we move on to Legion, the final patch of Warlords of Draenor introduced a ton of new demon models, including one for the Felguard. Then as we move on to Legion, the expansion of demons, we saw another major rework of demonology, and the loss of the Wrathguard, with the Grimoire of Supremacy talent being removed. The Felguard now cost a Soul Shard again, as the Soul Shard system was returned. However, just as a spell resource instead of a cumbersome reagent mechanic. With Legion, we got introduced to the Artifact system. These powerful weapons granted unique skills to each spec, the demonology one being the Skull of the First Minari, Thalkil. This skull had many talents built into it. However, very few of them affected the Felguard, with one of the only ones being the artifact ability called the Left Hand of Darkness, which just increased the Felguard's damage by 20%. Now, onto normal talents. Grimoire of Synergy got increased to a 25% damage buff instead of the 15%, and the Grimoire Service talent also received a massive buff. Where its cooldown was lowered by 30 seconds, it now dealt 100% increased damage, and it lasted 25 seconds instead of 20. We also saw the addition of the PvP talent system in Legion. This system gave you new talents only usable in PvP, one of those being the Fellord, a far more powerful Felguard who had the ability to stun people. On a 1.5 minute cooldown, you would place this demon down like you would place down a normal AoE, which would then spawn the Fellord who would guard the area. Lasting 15 seconds, it would knock down anyone who entered the area during its duration, which was a very good talent for Warlocks trying to deny areas like a flag, or to defend themselves from a rogue who refused to go away. Felguards also received another new ability, this being the passive ability called Void Reflexes, which was added to both the Felguard and Void Walker, increasing their parry and dodge chance. Now, onto that Wrathguard situation. Warlock saw this demon removed with the removal of the Grimoire of Supremacy talent, but with it gone, they added cosmetic glyphs to the game to turn your demon into one of these demons, one of them being the Wrathguard. However, unlike the others, it was not actually added to the game until a later patch in Legion, being patch 7.2. But when it first got added, it actually lowered the Felguard's damage, as it had weird interactions with the Felguard suddenly becoming a dual wielder instead of a slow two-handed weapon user. Back when the Wrathguard was a talent that increased the pet's damage, having a bit more or less damage was fine. But when it becomes a cosmetic glyph, it doing a bit more or a bit less damage becomes more of a bigger issue, and the pet continued dealing randomly more or less damage constantly, patch to patch, all the way until the end of Legion. The glyph did have the Felguard glyph built into it though, allowing the Wrathguard to have two custom weapons, either both the same weapon or a different one in each hand, again depending on what was in the Warlock's bag at the time. And now on to BfA. Since the cosmetic glyph for the Wrathguard was causing so many issues, at the start of BfA, the Wrathguard only had one weapon instead of two. And then once patch 8.1 came out, it suddenly started wielding two weapons again. And then a few weeks later, Blizzard removed that second weapon, leaving the Wrathguard with only one weapon again, as it is still to this day as of making this video. Blizzard couldn't figure out how to make the dual wielding work, so they just kinda got rid of it. Also with BfA, Demonology received another rework. They received a new talent called Demonic Strength, which on a 1 minute cooldown buffed your Felguard, causing it to charge the enemy and do a Fellstorm, a special one that had its damage increased by 400%. This special version of Fellstorm did not use the cooldown of your normal Fellstorm. This talent though, which granted you the spell, would not work if you had any of your other demons summoned, finally giving the spec a spell that only worked if you had the Felguard out. And then on the PvP side of things, the Fellord PvP talent got changed from knocking down people who entered to an effect where every 3 seconds it would do a 1 second stun to every enemy inside its radius, becoming even stronger. This demon could even have its duration extended by the new Demonic Tyrant ability, which increases the durations of demons and buffs their damage, including the Fellord. Soul Strike was another spell that only worked if you had the Felguard out. This ability on a 10-second cooldown commanded the Felguard to slash at the enemy with shadow damage, generating a soul shard. Basically a fancy instant cast shadow bolt with a cooldown, a good way to generate more soul shards in your rotation, and had more to do with your demon, which matches the Demonology's class theme. Soul Strike, like Axe Toss, could be used while you were CC'd, allowing you to do a little bit of extra damage while unable to cast spells yourself. Next, we saw a change to the Grimoire of Service, as it was no longer available to the other specs, and with this, all the demons other than the Felguard were removed from its functionality. Now it was simply called the Grimoire of Felguard. This Grimoire was seemingly drastically nerfed though, with its cooldown changing from 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. It summoned a Felguard, only dealing 25% increased damage instead of its old 100% increased, and it only lasted for 15 seconds, which was 10 seconds less than its previous incarnation. However, it could cast Fellstorm now, So there is that at least. And that is the end of the video on the final Warlock demon in the series of the history of all of the Warlock demons. The Felguard was the figurehead of the demonology Warlock, and would likely go down in history as the pure essence of demonology, if it wasn't for the fact that most Warlocks thought the Wrathguards were cooler. And if you wish to learn the history of all the other Warlock demons, I should have a playlist for them listed at the end of this video. Also, big thanks to the editor of this video, Felplague, who is the reason I'm able to continue the History of Certain Things series. So, if you have suggestions for a new one, you can always send suggestions to him on his Twitter or something, as he does have some sway in which one will be made next.